Ukraine. What is to be done? Stay with me to the end, Team Average. I'm trying a bit different video format here. Tell me if you like it. Ann Applebaum is like Bruce Springsteen. She's better live than on record. I'd rather hear her on a podcast than I seek her out, but I am reading Autocracy Inc. right now, which makes this average polemicist wonder, am I secretly on Russia Today's payroll? Putin, the old KGB man, the ranking godfather of Autocracy Inc. He judo flips Trump. He judo flips the EU. He is just more effective on a stage than any of them. Me? I flew missions for Operation Southern Watch. A medieval siege the UN says killed 500,000 Iraqi children. I was a small cog, yes, but still ashamed. Remember Saddam? Our man in Baghdad before and during the Iran-Iraq War. Then 20 years later, we destroyed Iraq in his name. For 3 years, the West never uttered proxy war, until Alaska, when we pulled back the curtain to reveal how the world really works. Applebaum is correct, but it is hard for me to rage at Russia when the US president is hawking meme coins and eau de parfum from the Oval Office, when the ruling family's hotel deals dictate trade policy. When I was flying against Iraq for a nonsense, a country that, at the time, couldn't get John Deere tractors working, but was supposedly building the nukes and terror camps to wreck the whole world. What is the one piece of greatness from this era? A new English phrase, sexed up dossier. I have no time for ossified cold warriors. We are 4 generations on. Retire and write mea culpas, or memoirs. The long telegram is long gone, and we need new thinking. I'm an average polemicist who struggles to afford a family holiday thanks to the airline baggage kleptocracy. How much does the RT pay again? But I am worried that Putin makes sense on the global stage, and our own leaders make none. This is not an apology for Putin, Nyet. I just want different thinking on the issue that has dominated my entire life, except for the decade where we destroyed Iraq and terror in one fell swoop. I think this interview over the weekend by Sagar and Ryan from Breaking Points with Professor John Mearsheimer is fabulous.
Take Ryan is that the vast majority of people in the foreign policy establishment refuse to accept the argument that the Russians see Ukraine in NATO as an existential threat. It's an existential threat for Putin and the people around him. And given that it's an existential threat, they are willing to fight a war, a major league war, to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO.
I disagree with the good professor here. Putin, who grew up and was constructed by the Soviet superpower, does want some restored glory of the Soviet Empire. Having said that, as we will see later, the Russians have been consistent with their aims for 3 years.
Mainly that Ukraine is losing on the battlefield, and the West cannot do much to help it at this point in time. So if you can create a ceasefire, put an end to the fighting on the battlefield, that gives the Ukrainians a respite, number one. But the Russians are not Dumkovs, and they understand if they're winning, it would be nuts, to put it bluntly, for them to stop the war when they're winning. What the Russians want is they want a peace agreement. They want to settle this one, but they want to settle it on their terms.
Putin, as I said earlier, has not told the full story on root causes, but these 3 points have been consistent for 3 years. Listen.
This war for them is existential, and they have a set of demands that they will not compromise on. And there are 3 principal demands. One is that Ukraine and the West recognize that Russia has annexed those 4 oblasts that they now partially occupy, 4 oblasts in Ukraine, plus Crimea. That's demand number one. Demand number two is that Ukraine be a neutral state. That means it can't be in NATO and there can't be Western security guarantees, especially a security guarantee from the United States. Ukraine, from the Russian perspective, has to be neutral. Third demand is that Ukraine has to disarm, not completely, but disarm to the point where it has no offensive military capability, i.e., it can't threaten Russia. So, what we have here is the Russians want a peace agreement. The Ukrainians in the West have no interest in a peace agreement. The West and the Ukrainians want a ceasefire, and the Russians have no interest in a ceasefire.
Right.
And the end result is you have a very short meeting and you have no agreement.
Hitler wanted to make Ukraine the breadbasket of the Third Reich. There was the Truman Doctrine in NATO before 1950. Even under the reign of Gorbachev, Reagan and Thatcher called the USSR the evil empire. The Russians have been willing to bleed for the Donbass. We want to play new Cold War games. Why?
Immediately after the war started, Putin put out peace feelers to the Ukrainians to come to some sort of peace agreement so that they could end the war then. Remember, the war starts in February 2022, and they're negotiating. This is the Ukrainians and the Russians are negotiating to end the war almost immediately after it starts, the famous Istanbul negotiations. And they don't reach an agreement, but they're making major league progress towards reaching an agreement. And what happens is that the Americans and the British, in the form of Boris Johnson, come in and tell the Ukrainians to walk away from the negotiations and to continue the war.
There is a consistency in Russian demands. Russia and Ukraine met in Istanbul immediately after the invasion to discuss peace around the three conditions just mentioned. What if Russia means what it says? Donetsk and Luhansk, barely discussed in the West, had significant alignment with Moscow. If this is a bluff, we will know soon enough, and Russia has deuces and sevens forevermore. What choices are left to Ukraine, though, unless NATO is willing to bleed for the Donbass?
From what I hear from Ukrainians, they say, okay, it's actually just going to give Russia a chance to regroup, and then they're going to attack again and completely cut us off from the Black Sea, and we will just be, instead of a 80% rump of a country, we'll be a 40% rump of a country, landlocked, and just a dual client of both Russia and the EU. So if you're the Ukrainians, what are you fighting for here, and what's your best case scenario?
Well, I have been arguing for a long time, I think, as you know, Ryan, that the best case from Ukraine's point of view is to settle this war immediately. Because as you point out, they're going to lose 20% if they agree to give up those 4 oblasts plus Crimea. About 22% of pre-2014 Ukraine will be lost. Is this a tragedy for Ukraine? Absolutely. There's no question about it. I fully understand why no Ukrainian would want to agree to give up 22% of the territory of the country. However, the question you always have to ask yourself as a good strategist is, what is the alternative? And the alternative is to continue fighting. And as you pointed out, if you continue fighting, you're likely to lose probably about half the country. You're likely to lose Odessa, and that would be catastrophic. It seems to me the least bad alternative, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, it's not a good alternative, it's the least bad alternative, is to cut a deal now and minimize how much territory you lose, and also minimize the number of Ukrainians who are going to die if you continue to fight on.
I have barely heard proxy war spoken in polite society for 3 years.
But this is a completely different situation in that regard. The smart thing for the Ukrainians to do, as I said before, is accept the fact that they've lost, right? Try to settle it now, and then work out a modus vivendi with the Russians. Do I think that's going to happen? No.
Right.
And again, I have to say, I do not understand why people cannot come to grips with the fact that settling this war and creating decent relations between Russia and Ukraine is in Ukraine's interest, right? It just boggles my mind that we
Well,
continue to
ultimately
prove war.
is it ultimately because it's not up to Ukraine? Victoria Nuland said, as I think Russia was launching its invasion, okay, if they succeed and go into Kyiv, they can look forward to, decades of guerrilla war inside Ukraine. And it wasn't as if this was a generous offer to Ukraine. This was we are going to cede this guerrilla war, whether Ukraine likes it or not. So maybe it's just as simple as, if it was up to Ukraine, they would make a more strategic choice.
And I think this reflects Victoria Nuland's thinking that we don't have to do the fighting, we don't do the dying, and we can use the Ukrainians for that purpose. And the end result is, I think you're going to have poisonous relations between the Russians on one side and the Ukrainians and the West on the other side for as far as the eye can see. You're not going to have that modus vivendi that I was talking about.
While on the topic of proxy wars, we should mention just one more, and one Trump foolishly in both his first term and this one has made much, much worse. A lesson that our moral regeneration and cultural invigoration is not likely to come from any of the three sky gods. The West is positively not in moral fighting shape.
And then there's the moral dimension. We
Right.
don't want to lose sight of the fact that the United States is complicit in a genocide in the Middle East. That what is happening in Gaza is a genocide. And for those people who don't want to call it a genocide, I would think you at least have to acknowledge that this is mass murder on a scale that we haven't seen in a long time. And certainly it's mass murder on a scale we would never accept or should never accept from a close ally. So, from both a strategic point of view and a moral point of view, when you look at the behavior of the Biden administration and now the Trump administration, it leaves me at least with a sick feeling in my stomach.
I couldn't agree with you more, sir.
Europe could do so much better. In Europe, there are some green shoots of a better, more global world. Yet even elected leaders here act as if under the inertia of the hillbilly family feuds that dominated European history for 1,000 years in an endless succession of the most inane and most horrific wars of humankind. Struggle with peace. Team Average.